Thank you. Thank you. Seriously, it is so great to be here. It is such an honor and a privilege. We love Next and Joe and Dana. And so we have really kind of since the last time we've been here to speak, have really prayerfully considered and we've decided to make Next our home. And some of you might go, that's hilarious because we never see you. And so let me just clarify that. So oftentimes with our ministry, we are traveling and speaking at events or conferences or other churches. But when we're able, as much as we can, we're here. We just love what Next is doing, what Next is about, the team. And so we're just so thankful that you guys have partnered with us. It means so much. And I try to say this every time we get a thank you from a pastor or a ministry spouse, we just want to share that back with you. And so on behalf of all of the pastors and pastors' spouses that we're connecting with and caring for and coaching, I just want to say thank you for believing in us and supporting us and allowing us to do that. I also just want to say this real quick. I'm sure many of you know this, and I'm sure the team or people here are actively doing things. But I want to just take a moment. This month is Pastor Appreciation Month. And for someone who has sat in the role of pastor for most of my adult life and now sits in the role of supporting pastors, it's really fun for me to stand here. And I just want to pray for your pastors and your ministry directors and your elders. And so if you don't remember or weren't here the last time, Linda, my wife, and I, we went to college with Joe and Dana and consider them friends. And so it's easy for me on times to encourage him and to pray for him. I've gotten to know Landon a little bit through the Youth Pastor Network, met Andrew through here and just kind of, and I was scolded would be a really harsh word. I was encouraged not to use the word lucky when I said something, oh, like you're lucky. And they're like, no, don't say that. So that's in my brain. And so you didn't need to know that. And like blessed feels so churchy, but I guess that's the right word. You as a church are blessed with your leadership. And so I would just love to take a moment and pray for them and pray for you. So let's just do that real quick before we dive in. God, I just want to take a moment and to say thank you. God, I want to say thank you for the pastors, ministry directors, leaders, and elders here at Next. God, I want to thank you for them and their families. God, I just ask that we as a church will do everything we can to rally around, support, encourage, and bless the men and women who lead this church. So God, thank you for what you've done in and through them, the things that you're going to do in and through them. And God, we just ask that you will continue to remind us to be that voice of encouragement and to show that appreciation, not just 1 month of the year, but throughout the year. God, we just thank you again for them. We lift them to you, and we come before you as a church to do that. We ask this in your name. Amen. All right. So here's what we're going to do this morning. I am going to kind of leave a question with you that I would like for you to sit with through the service, afterwards, maybe throughout the week. And I've realized that for a long time, that's kind of how I have spoken. In fact, I'm reminded one time when it was a youth Sunday, I was speaking in big church, that's what we called it. All the students were sitting right in the front row. And I started the message by saying, I'd like to ask you a question. And one of the students, who I think we in the moment both forgot that it wasn't youth group, he went, figures. And I looked at him like, I'm going to wrestle you. And then I'm like, oh, I can't. It's big church. But questions for me are just really great places to start. So I want to ask this question of you this morning. And the question is, what on earth am I doing? What on earth am I doing? And one of the reasons I want to ask that question is because oftentimes you and I are confronted with our own mortality, right? There's things that happen that make us realize, oh yeah, that's right. I'm not going to be here forever. Sometimes that happens because we get a phone call from a doctor and we realize, oh, I'm not going to be here forever. Sometimes it comes when we're sitting at a funeral for someone that we loved and cared for. And we think, someday this will happen for me. I wonder what they'll say. And sometimes when we're in those moments, we ask the question, what have I done? Right? Because when we were little, people asked us, what do you want to be when you grow up? And at some point, people stopped asking us that. Right? Because sometimes we did the things we said we wanted to do, and sometimes we didn't. And so people stopped asking that question. But the question that we want to ask today is, so what are you doing right now? And when we're met with those interruptions of the reality that we won't be here forever, it makes us pause and we ask that question again. For me, it wasn't the most recent time, but it is the most memorable. The most recent time the most memorable time when I was confronted with that reality was at last Thanksgiving. And we're sitting at the dinner table and the food is in front of us. But by the way, it wasn't the whole turkey. Like we carve it in another room and then bring it. I don't know if anyone does that. In the first service, there was actually one woman pulled me aside. She goes, that's what we do. We bring the whole turkey and we do the knife thing and and I was like, I want to go to Thanksgiving at your house because I just cut it and I bring the food. But anyway, it's great food and we're all just sitting around. We're enjoying Thanksgiving dinner with my family. My wife is there, our 3 kids. My oldest daughter, out of nowhere, goes, so Dad, I've been thinking about your funeral. And my initial thought was how to ruin Thanksgiving in one sentence. Now, in her defense, we had recently been to 2 family funerals. And so we had just experienced it, and it wasn't necessarily fresh on our minds, at least not mine. But she went on to say, I've just been thinking, I don't think I want your funeral to be like a really sad, kind of morbid thing. And so I was thinking of ideas, and I've landed on, I think what we're going to do is have a roast. And I thought, no, I don't want that. And as she started to talk about it, she's like, we'll share this story and this story. And I kept going, no. And what I'm watching is my wife and my other 2 kids go, I'm like, no, stop. Like I can feel this idea getting out of my control. And so I interrupted them. I said, no, like as your dad, as the patriarch of this family, I forbid it. I don't know how that would go over in your homes, but my daughter responded by just simply saying, unfortunately, you won't be there to stop us. To which I agreed. And then at that point, it started really gaining serious traction. My daughter starts texting my cousins, my aunt, like extended family, just saying, hey, like, what about doing a roast for my dad's funeral? And everyone's like, oh my gosh, that's such a great idea. Like, we're in. Like, mark us down for sharing a story. Not one person asked, is Todd okay? Like, but anyway, it was a moment where I realized someday there's going to be a funeral for me. And so I don't know if you are a fan of David Crowder. We've been fans for a long time, and his latest album is called Exiles, and there's a song on there called Dash. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but the beginning of the song goes like this. Sunday morning, preacher said, life's a mist, it's just a breath. We're only here for a little while. He talked about his daddy's grave, how it read 1910 to 98. But the years between were just a little line. It got me wondering what I'm chasing. Don't want another minute wasted. There's a day we're born, a day we pass, and in between there's just a dash. What on earth am I doing? And I think about that song, and I think about that moment with my family, and the realization is there's a day that I was born, I'm in the dash, and I don't know that next date. And so while I'm in the dash, what am I doing? And so what I want to do today is I want to share with you, talk about a parable that Jesus told, that my hope is simply this. My hope is you'll be encouraged and challenged at the same time by this parable. And it's found in Matthew chapter 25. And so if you want to turn there, before we actually look at it, there's just a couple things to go over. The first thing is this. Where this parable is found is in a portion of scripture that's often called the Olivet Discourse, where Jesus is preaching, and maybe I'm wrong, but I feel that most people either know this passage like really well, like they've really dug into it because they kind of love the end times things and they've really just studied it and they really know it well, or you've read it and kind of skimmed it and just like, I don't really know everything that he's talking about. And you just kind of, you know a little bit about it. Those kind of, I feel like, are where most of us are. The reality is, there could be some of you who are here today or listening online that you go, I've never even read that. I don't know anything about the Bible. I'm new to Jesus, or I'm just checking things out. And so if that's you, I want to ask you to stay with me. We're going to do our best to kind of stay out of the weeds of some of that end time stuff and just really kind of focus on the point of the parable. And that being said, the word even parable, some of you go, okay, not 100% sure I know what that means. Here's just a simple way of looking. A parable is a story that has a kind of a physical surface level truth. But then there's a deeper spiritual meaning that's in that parable, that Jesus was a master storyteller and that he would tell these stories that if you only heard the surface, you'd be like, that's pretty good. That's good advice. Right? Like Jesus talked about, a foolish man who builds his house on sand and a wise man builds it on a rock. And if that's all you heard, you'd be like, pretty good. Like, I didn't know he was an architect, but it's good advice. But then you would unpack a little bit and go, oh, there's this deeper thing that he's talking about. And so that's what happens. And so there's 3 parables that are all connected. They all kind of have the same basic meaning. The parable starts actually in Matthew 24. There's the parable of the faithful servant and then the other one who's not faithful. And so the point is of these 3 parables is you have a job, right? You have one job. Be faithful to the person who asked you to do that one job and be ready for when they return. That's the point of these 3 parables. So that's the first one. The second one is the beginning of Matthew 25, where it's a story of 10 bridesmaids or 10 virgins, and their job was to have the lamps ready for the bridegroom. And they come with the lamps, but 5 of them forget the oil. And so the whole point of it is, see, you weren't ready. You got to be ready for when the bridegroom comes. And because of that, they missed the wedding. It's a whole story. And it's great. It's right there, Matthew 25. But again, you have one job. Be faithful to the person who asked you to do that and be ready for when they return. And so in Matthew 25, verse 14 is where we're going to read and camp out. But before we do that, I'm just a fan of that phrase, one job. And the reality is this, if someone has said that to you, like, hey, you had one job, you probably really messed something up. Right? Like we can agree. Like they weren't encouraged. They weren't saying great job. He had one job, great job. They were like, seriously, you had one job. And so I just feel on some level the internet was made for people who had one job and did not do it well. And so here, let me just show you, let me maybe prove my point. Here's like so this. Like somebody left the work site that day going, good job, right? And they're like, no, like you had one job, right? And again, I get like on some level, they might have realized it as they're finishing up the E and they go, oh man, now I kind of have to wait for that to dry. I got to paint everything black and then start over. And so maybe it was left for a little bit, but this person, like I don't see how you're putting your tools back into a tool bag going, right? Like, no. Come on. Now, here's the funny thing. Actually, I think it's okay to say this. Dana actually told me after the service, there was a stop sign in their neighborhood that looked like that. That was up for a while. And so she has a picture of it. And I'm going, that's funny, because there was a part of me that thought maybe that was just photoshopped. But it happens, my point. Here's the next one. I think the person who did this one job obviously had something against the person who asked them to do it. Because I don't know how that happens. Like, I don't see that being an accident. Seems like you were angry at somebody. This to me is kind of the epitome of like, you literally just had one job. And I guess the second job was too much for you. Right, like that second job was literally this. Like, you didn't even have to bend over. Nobody's asking you to pick it up. Just move it. But you had one job. I don't know if anyone has ever received a package that looked like that. But you have probably said, come on, UPS, you had one job, right? Like, and then this is probably my favorite. I don't know exactly what happened, but I like to pretend that somebody opened that and they realized there wasn't a second piece of cheese. And so they went to the guy and said, oh, this doesn't have cheese on it. And somebody in the back said, oh, I'll give you a piece of cheese, right? And like, and I think what I'm seeing is real, that it looks like they just put their finger through it first and then put the cheese on top. Like somebody, I don't know. But you had, again, one job. And so when we think, has God given us a job? What is it God has asked me to do? What on earth am I doing? I want to read, we're just going to read real quick the parable, and then we'll kind of pull out a couple things. And my hope is as we pull those out, you are encouraged and challenged at the same time. So let's do that. The beginning of the parable says this: for it is just like a man, and real quick, I'm not gonna stop. This is the only time. It there refers to back Matthew 25, verse 1, where it says, at that time the kingdom of heaven will be like. And Jesus would often use that language. And so here when he says it, that's what he's talking about, the kingdom of heaven. So we can read it. For the kingdom of heaven is just like a man about to go on a journey. He called his own servants and entrusted his possessions to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2 talents, and to another 1 talent, depending on each one's ability. And then he went on a journey. Immediately, the man who had received 5 talents put them to work and earned 5 more. In the same way, the man who had earned 2, the man with 2 earned 2 more. But the man who had received 1 talent went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. Verse 20 says this: the man who received 5 talents approached, presented 5 more talents, and said, Master, you gave me 5 talents. See that I have earned 5 more talents. Verse 21 says this: his master said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Share your master's joy. Then the man with 2 talents also approached. He said, Master, you gave me 2 talents. See, I have earned 2 more talents. In verse 23, it says exactly the same thing. His master said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Share your master's joy. Then the man who had received 1 talent approached and said, Master, I know you. You're a harsh man, reaping where you haven't sown and gathering where you haven't scattered seed. So I was afraid, and I went off and I hid your talent in the ground. See, you have what is yours. His master replied to him, you evil, lazy servant. If you knew that I reap where I haven't sown and gather where I haven't scattered, then you should have deposited the money with the bankers, and I would have received my money back with interest when I returned. So take the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10 talents. For to everyone who has more will be given, and he will have more than enough. But from the one who does not have, even what he has will be taken away from him. And throw this good-for-nothing servant into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Can we agree the ending is not a great story? Like, you're like, oh, I feel so great. Like, super encouraged. Todd, job well done. Like, I had one job, right? No. But let's just take a moment and walk through this and let's look at a few things that happen in this story that I think are kind of important. And the first one is this. The first one is they all had an opportunity. Now, I didn't say they all had the same opportunity, right? It's clear that the master knows his servants and knows their abilities. And so when he calls them in, one gets 5 talents, one gets 2, and one gets 1. Now, real quick, if you're sitting here going, okay, I don't understand. What do you mean he gave them talents? What do you mean 5 talents? We use that word to mean a very different thing. Real quick, a talent in the context here is actually a measurement of weight. And we don't know exactly what was in the bag. We'll just say there was a bag, right? So we don't know what was in it exactly. But a lot of scholars, and I trust them because they're smarter than I am, a lot of scholars believe that one talent, was approximately an annual salary times 20. Thank you for saying, wow, whoever that was. Because for me, just reading it quick, and over the years, I looked at this story and I felt sympathy for the guy with 1. I don't know if anyone else here did, but you think of that moment where the master calls 3 people in and he gives 5 to 1. And if I'm in that room, I go, of course you did, because he's great. Like, we know he's the best among us. Of course he gets 5. The person who gets 2, they're like, oh, cool, I got 2. I mean, it's not even half, but it's fine, it's good. I'm thankful. And then there's the guy who gets 1. And I looked at it and I go, this doesn't seem fair, it doesn't seem right. And then I go, wait a minute, 1 talent was 20 times annual salary? I don't feel sorry anymore. I go, that's an opportunity, right? Your master knew you, trusted you with what was his, and gave you a good chunk of money. So they all had an opportunity. What we see is that 2 of them immediately go to work, because that's who they are. And in fact, anytime I speculate, I'll always say that I think on some level, the number 2 guy looks at the 5 and they see him go to work and goes, oh yeah, I need to go do that. Because he's just a leader. He's just like the best at everything. So 5 and 2 go to work. 1, because you know what? I'm just going to go dig a hole, put it in there, and when he comes back, I'll give him back his money. It seems weird. You've been given an opportunity. You were given a job to manage those funds. My guess is these guys, that's what they did for the master. He had equipped them. They knew how to work money, make investments. And so we see that they all had an opportunity. And what we need then to do is look at the results. Now, before we dive into the results, let me just share a verse with you that comes from 1 Corinthians. It says this: each will receive his own reward according to his what? According to his labor, not according to the results. Not according to the results is not in the Bible. I put that there. That's why it's a different color. But it's true. It's based on our labor, not on the results. So let me just encourage you. This is the first time. God's not worried about your results. In fact, I think anytime we start looking at the results we've done, he's like, come on, like you're missing it. He's in charge of the results. Keep that in mind. So as we look at the results from this story, I just love, like if I was there, I would be asking questions. Like I'd be that annoying, middle schooler who's always like, oh, I have a question. Like, can you explain that a little bit more? And what I want to visualize how this meeting went when he comes back and he calls the 3 of them in. And so one scenario I see is that he's like in his office and there's a waiting room and they all walk in with their bags of money. And of course, Mr. 5 walks in with 10 bags. We're like, sure, of course, we get it. Like, good job, we get it. 2 walks in with 4. Looks at the 10 bags, looks at 4. That's all I got. But 1 walks in with 1. And I'll be honest, I've always seen myself as somewhere between 1 and 2. They feel relatable to me. And so if I'm sitting there, I go, well, I did better than that, but I'm not as good as that. And I don't know what they're feeling, their emotions. Again, it's a story that Jesus tells. So we fill in those gaps, but then there's the meeting comes. And again, I don't know if they're all in there together when they present back to the master their bags of money. Whether it was individual or as a group, we see this amazing thing happen. Mr. 5 walks in and puts 10 bags of money on the desk. And the master says, well done, good and faithful servant. Enjoy your reward. Wow. And again, there's a part of me that wants all of them to be in the room to hear that. Because 2 and 1 are like, of course, like, yep, there we go, good job. That's what we expected. And so when 2 walks up and goes, hey, I just got 4. I did my best. And he hears the exact same message. Well done, good and faithful servant. To me, it takes my breath away. Whew, I wasn't expecting. I wasn't expecting you to say the same thing to him that you did me. And then the story takes this really weird turn. As number 1 walks up to the desk and puts the 1 bag, he goes, you know what? Listen, here's the deal. You're a bit of a jerk. And this is why I want the other 2 guys in the room to go, wait, what? What did he just say? That's the master. What are you doing? He's like, yeah, you're kind of a jerk. So, listen, we all know you're stealing from other people. You're super dishonest. You're unfair. So I just dug a hole, put the money in there, and then here you go. And when you read it like that, you're like, what in the world is happening? What is going on in this moment? And so if we believe that they had a job, they were supposed to be faithful to the master and be ready for when he returned. 1 and 2 nailed it. But number 3 doesn't. He wasted the opportunity. And of course, it wasn't as big as the other opportunities, but the opportunity he was given, he wasted. And what we see is because how he feels about the master. So here's where I just want to encourage you and I want to challenge you as we wrap up this morning. I want to say this. We all have an opportunity. And the reason I can say we all have an opportunity is you're still here. There's not another number after your dash yet. You're still here. You have an opportunity. And it is not the same opportunity as the person maybe next to you or across the room or on the stage. Listen, let me be honest with you. I begged my parents when I was in 6th grade for a guitar and guitar lessons. Like that's all I wanted to do was to learn to play the guitar and be good at it. And so my parents got me a guitar and they got me lessons and turns out I'm not good at it. But over the years, I watched people who picked up a guitar and played, and I was like, it seriously can't be that hard. Turns out it is. But when I'm in my 20s, I go and I get like a secondhand guitar, and I go and I get lessons. And I worked really hard, and I got to the point where if it was like what I just kind of call the Johnny Cash chords, like if it was like C, G, and D, I could play along. But the strumming wasn't right. It wasn't perfect. Like nobody ever plugged me into a sound system to let me play. And then I come here, and I'm sitting and standing right in front of, it's Liam, right? And I go, seriously, God? Like, you couldn't just give me a little bit of that? I mean, at one point, I don't know if anybody else noticed it or if he does this often, he's playing the guitar with one hand. I'm going, that's just not fair. And then he sings. And I go, like, God, now you're just being mean to me, clearly. But I look at it and I go, he has a gifting that I don't have. And oftentimes what we do, and what initially when I read this story years ago, I would feel jealousy. And oftentimes when that happens, we go, well, if I don't have that, I'm not doing anything. And the reality is, we don't all have the same opportunity, but God has given you an opportunity. And so that's the part I hope you hear encouragement. My guess is some of you are sitting here and going, I don't know what that is. I bet people around you do. I bet there's people around you who are going, you're really good at this one thing. And if you're a one talent person, can you stop saying, well, I don't have 2 or 5 talents? Can you look at the talent you've been given and go, oh, that's actually a lot. There's actually something there. God has given that opportunity to me. And so I want to encourage you, you have an opportunity. The question now that is the challenge part is, what are you going to do with it? Let me just be real honest with you. One of my favorite Old Testament characters is Moses, because God comes to him and goes, I need you to do this one thing, this one job. I have one job for you. And Moses goes, nah, you got the wrong guy. And 7 years ago, when we started an event down at Harvey Cedars called the Youth Leader Summit, it was literally, the first one was just like me and 8 friends. So I was like, no big deal. And then all of a sudden we're like, let's make this a thing. And I went, yeah, let's make this a thing. Who could do it now? I felt God go, Todd, I've given that opportunity to you. What? No, find someone who's good at that. God, you please find someone else. This past year, every room at Harvey Cedars that has a private bathroom like connected to it was sold out. Please don't try to give me any credit, because I'm the same guy that went, what? No, don't ask me. 2 years ago, friends of mine called from Florida and they said, hey, we've seen this thing you're doing in New Jersey. Would you come down here and do one in Florida? And I said, no, like that's crazy. Go find somebody else to do it. And God said, no, I need you to go to Florida and do that. So we did. We launched a second one. 2 weeks ago, 2 friends from Michigan called me and said, hey, we've seen the Florida and New Jersey thing. Can you come and do one in Michigan? As sure as I'm standing here, I got off the phone and I just sat in my office for a moment. And I go, God, are you sure? I just don't see it. I don't think I'm the right person to do it. That's the battle you and I face. And sometimes that doubt will make you go, no. Don't waste the opportunity that God has given you. You have one job. Probably you have more than that. For us, it came in a season of leaving church ministry and caring for pastors, and I had the same conversation. Please find someone else to do that. But you as a church have believed in us, and it means so much for you to encourage us. And so we come back to that question, what on earth am I doing? If you have an opportunity, what are you going to do with it? And here, to me, is the greatest motivation. We always kind of ask the why. Why, Todd, why would I do that thing that God wants me to do? And I would say this, because the message from the parables is the same message we have today. The master has given you something to do. He's given you an opportunity. Be faithful to him and do it until he comes back or you see him face to face. Because in that moment, my greatest motivation is simply this. Whenever that time comes, whatever date will come after the dash, and quite honestly, hopefully there's not a roast after the number, but if there is, honestly, maybe some of you will just come and share a nice story, kind of balance things out. But the reality is, all of us are going to have that second date. And when that moment comes, I'm sure you, like me, have thought, dreamed, wondered about what that moment will be like. And all I want, with all of the glory of heaven around me, all I want is for Jesus to say, hey, Todd, my good and faithful servant, well done. And I don't want that just for me. I want that for my wife and my kids. I want that for you. You have been given an opportunity. Be faithful to the Master. Be faithful to Jesus until he comes or he calls you home. Let me pray for you. God, I guess first I want to say that I am sorry that I still sometimes doubt, question, push back against the opportunity. But God, I feel like I'm not alone in that. And so my prayer for me and for everyone in this room, everyone who can hear my voice, is that we will say yes to the opportunity. And God, that we will do everything we can to be faithful to you. That we'll work until the very moment that you come again or that you take us home. God, thank you for the promise of hearing those words, well done, my good and faithful servant. And may that be the motivator that each and every one of us needs from time to time. God, we take this prayer and we leave it at your throne, and we do so in the name of Jesus. Amen.